Hi folks, this is Rock Reynolds coming to you in Internet Land. For this, my most important video ever, I'm going to use my real name, Roger Raynard. And the subject here is the big lie in Genesis chapter 1, which occurs in verse 28. I'm going to do a three-part video, and this is part 1. I'm going to start off with a prologue. I'm going to talk about subject, the Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. There's a lie in there. The entire verse 28 is not a lie, but there is a big lie, and it's a big one, the biggest lie ever. Before I talk about the lie, in section 2, I'm going to talk about what is so special about Genesis chapter 1. What separates Genesis chapter 1 from the rest of the Old Testament? And it's big. Section 3, what is the big lie in chapter 1, verse 28? Section 4, what should be the truth in chapter 1, verse 28. Then that's going to be the end of part 1. In part 2, I'm going to talk about who are the great sea monsters. I'm going to pick it up with section 5. Who are the great sea monsters in verse 21? Who are the beasts of the earth mentioned in section 24? Who are the cattle mentioned in verse 24? What food did God provide for man? That's section 8. And I'm going to finish up section 2, part 2, with who are the names in the animal kingdom not mentioned in Genesis chapter 1. And for part 3, the last part, I'm going to talk about the 6 days of creation. I'm not going to talk about the seventh day of rest. And I'm also going to talk about the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. For anybody who wants a copy of this document, you can get a copy of this document in Word or PDF format. Go to Dropbox.com and go to the folder Free-fiddle-Workshop. Free-fiddle-workshop. I put this document called The Big Lie. I put this in the same folder as my fiddle instructions, my fiddle workshop instructions. So once again, Dropbox.com, Free-fiddle-workshop, and you can get a copy of this document in Word and PDF format. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to start off with the prologue. My real name is Roger Raynard, fully Roger William Raynard Sr. This 3-part video is a hypothesis. These are all just theories of mine. They are not statements of fact. They are my best guess is what the truth is. My motives for presenting this subject are entirely selfish. My intent is for the audience to pay attention to the arguments being presented, not to scribbles on a piece of paper, and not to the presenter, me. So let's go ahead and get started. Section 1, subject, Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, contains a lie. I'm going to read section 1, verse 28. And God blessed them, and God said to them, quote, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth." End of quote. And what I'm going to claim, the part about the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, that part is true, but giving us dominion over every living thing that moves upon the earth, that's the lie, and that's a big one. Before I get into the lie, I'm going to, section 2, what is so special about Genesis chapter 1? What separates this first chapter from all the rest of the Bible? Throughout chapter 1, the spiritual being giving commands is named God with a capital G. Starting in section 2, though, in chapter 2, there's an entirely new being called the Lord God. It's not God, but starting in chapter 2, it's the Lord God. Lord is all uppercase, L-O-R-D, they're all uppercase. My Bible, though, has the L a little bit bigger, almost trying to make it look like the O, R, and D are lowercase. But if you look closely, they're all uppercase. One note here, and one of the old definitions of Lord was breadwinner, and at that time the corresponding definition of lady was bread kneader, K-N-E-A-D-R, D-E-R. My hypothesis number 1, Why is this lie in verse 28? Why is this so important? And I'm claiming that this lie is extremely profound because the lie is attributed to God, the true God, with a capital G, not the Lord God, who picks up in chapter 2. This is big. It is upon this lie that so many other lies depend. And very often, the way evil works is just to skip over step 1. And that's what's happening here. Right out of the box, this big lie begets many other lies. Before I get into the information, my hypothesis number 2, how old is this information? My hypothesis is that chapter 1 is 400,000, the information here is 400,000 years old. It may have been just transmitted orally at first. It may not even have been written down until section 2, but 400,000 years. The content starting in section 4 in chapter 2 after verse 4, that's 40,000 years old. So once again, my hypothesis, chapter 1, 400,000 years old. Chapter 2, 40,000 years old. My hypothesis number 3, the entire universe is 400,000 years old. Here's the creation story. About the creation of the universe. I'm a believer in chapter 1 that the universe was created in 6 days. That's 24-hour days. Yes, 24-hour days, just like we know them today. That's what it says in the Bible. I believe this. What is the big lie in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28? I'm on to section 3 now. And the lie is that God gave man, quote, dominion over every living thing that moves upon the earth. I'd like to point out that man here is defined in verse 27 as male and female. In other words, even females are called man. So you could use the adjective him to apply to females according to chapter 1, verse 27. Conversely, in chapter 2, verse 23, with the Adam and Eve creation, that's different. There, not God, but the Lord God calls a new creation woman, that's with a capital W, because she was taken out of man, that's with a capital M. Notice that woman was not taken out of man with the lowercase m. My hypothesis number 4, the creation story in chapter 1 is entirely different than the creation story in chapter 2. My hypothesis is that 360,000 years separate these two creation stories. I didn't include this in the text, but a thumbnail is the chapter 1 creation story is the true God's creation of Neanderthal man. The chapter 2 creation story is the false God, the Lord God's creation of Homo sapiens sapiens. What should be, section 4. So what should be the truth in in chapter 1, verse 28? And the truth should be that verse 28 should match verse 26, like the Bible always does. The truth in verse 28 should be that God gave man, quote, not dominion over everything that moves upon the earth, but dominion over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. These words match the words in verse 26. I did not talk about the commands about the fish of the sea or the birds of the air because those match. We did get dominion over those. But we did not. What's the difference? The difference I'm going to talk about, since we did not give dominion over every living thing that moves upon the earth, God did not give us dominion over the beasts of the earth or over the monsters of the sea. That's big. And that's the end of The Big Lie, Part 1. I'm Roger Raynard. See you in Part 2.